In this tutorial, we look at rendering brushes and bristles. We'll use the grass modifier with density and angle texture maps and a natural bristle material. We also look at a beech wood material and how to apply a logo on top of the wood but underneath a protective topcoat. Open Maxwell Studio and load a standard beginner layout. Drag a 3-point lighting studio from the library into the viewport, start the interactive renderer and rename the camera. Make sure to change the pixel aspect to 1. The default 0.9 is a bug. Unlock the camera sensor settings and set the resolution to HD format, which means 1920 by 1080 pixels. While setting up the beech wood, bristles and logo, it's a good idea to use the pinhole camera to eliminate the depth of field. Activate the camera in the viewport and select a product photography lens. Then set the f-stop, shutter speed and ISO for a nice depth of field for the final render. Import the OBJ file that comes in 2 parts: the brush body and a surface from which we'll grow the bristles. Select both parts and rotate them to their original position. Then reset the transformations so they won't interfere with the UV texture projections later. The bristle surface is inside the brush body. Rename the parts and hide the bristle surface as we are dealing with the brush body first. Select the texture decal mode and import a beech wood material from our library, then drag it onto the brush body. You'll get an alert message. Just click Yes to accept it. Why do you get this message? The beech wood material uses textures in absolute or real scale mode, specified in meters instead of relative. And the message reminds us that we must set the correct projector type for the object. On the Arrowway website, we find the beech wood textures dimensions. The texture browser is also very useful for choosing a texture, because we don't have to open the often huge texture files only to find out they're not quite what we're looking for. We're using the version with the highest available resolution. Select the brush and activate the UV mode in the menu bar. Rename the default projector, select the planar projection method and click Adjust to make sure the projector is set to 1 by 1 meter real scale mode. Rotate the projector so the beechwood grain goes in the right direction. Then angle it to approximate the grain along the front side. For a denser looking beechwood grain, we change the material's override map dimensions in global properties to half of the original scale. Beechwood has homogeneous and rather lively looking zones, so we slide the projector around to find an area we like. Now we have to make holes for the bristles, and we'll use a pattern designed in Illustrator. We take a 1:1 scale screenshot of the 3D model for an underlay and design a hole pattern on top. We take note of the dimensions and export the artwork as PNG file at 300 dpi resolution. We open the file in Photoshop, change it to grayscale format and save it again. Back in Maxwell, we load the PNG file in the color layer's opacity map slot using channel 1, so it is independent of the beechwood textures that are using channel 0. Then we can drag the opacity texture to the finished layer's opacity map slot. To apply the whole pattern to the brush body, we need to create a new projector for that object. We need a planar projection using channel 1 that corresponds to the channel we specified for the texture it will project. Click Adjust and enter the dimensions you used in Illustrator to make sure they match. To preview the whole pattern in the viewport, we can change the material's preview setting and move the projector to the desired location. Now that we've dealt with the brush body, let's move on to the bristles. Hide the brush body and create a new Maxwell grass modifier on the bristle growing surface, set the grass blade type to cylindrical, and use a moderate density of 10,000 blades per square meter. Set the blade length, variation and blade width according to the type of brush you designed. Because natural bristles aren't perfectly straight, we'll have to use the bending parameters and some variation to make them look real. To show more blades for the next step, we changed the display setting. Now we set the bristle density to 10 million per square meter, because each hole is only 3.5 mm wide and needs to grow a sufficiently high number of bristles. At the moment, bristles are growing everywhere on the surface, so we need to restrict the growth to where the holes are. This can be done with a density texture map, similar to the opacity texture map for the holes. We make an inverted copy and put a thin black stroke on the circles to reduce their size, because we can't have bristles that intersect the edges of the holes. As before, we export a PNG file and save it in grayscale format from Photoshop. Back in Maxwell, we load the density texture map into the grass modifier's density map slot. Like with the opacity texture map on the beechwood material, we need to change the projector for the density texture map to planar and choose the exact same dimension and location. This is so the bristles and holes in the brush body line up. If the viewport display doesn't update, just change the random seed parameter. Now the bristles grow where they should, but the angle of how they emerge is undefined, so we need to correct that. We can do this with an angle texture map, which is an image where different RGB values correspond to different angles. So let's have a look at a few. And there we have it. The bristles at the center are straight and gradually radiate outwards to an average angle of 75 degrees all around. So, how do angle texture maps work? And how do we paint them in Photoshop? Two blended gradients with a mix of red, blue and green values cause the grass blades to point in a specific direction. The first angle texture map grows flat bristles, because the red and blue values are either 0, neutral or 255, with green always neutral. The second map grows bristles from straight to an angle of 45 degrees, because while red and blue remain unchanged, the green value is halfway between neutral and 255. The third map, which is the one we need for the brush, has higher and lower red and blue values, while green is set to the maximum. Let's have a look at all three in Photoshop. We'll use the opacity or density texture map as an underlay and guidelines to snap to so we can paint the RGB gradients in a controlled way. Make sure to use the classic gradient mode. For the left to right orientation, we change only the red value in both gradient color stops. Remember that a value of 128 means neutral or no influence. For the top to bottom orientation, we change only the blue value. Make sure to always set the second layer to 50% opacity for a correct blending. It's just the same for the 45 and 75 degree gradients, but now the green values come into play for the upwards orientation. Finally, we export the angle texture map as a PNG file. The only thing missing is a natural bristle color material, so let's import one. Grass blade materials typically use 2 layers and 2 channels. An image or gradient texture map in channel 0 colors the blades from root to tip. An image or noise texture map in channel 1 randomizes the blades colors across the entire growth area. We assign the material to the grass modifier and deactivate the upper layer for channel 1. Let's open the gradient texture map on the lower layer and change one of the gradient color stops to green so we can see the gradient effect more clearly. Then we reactivate the upper layer and change the noise background color to green also, so we can see the noise effect a bit better. To sum it up, to render natural-looking brushware, we need a grass modifier, a density texture map, an angle texture map, and a 2-layer 2-channel bristle material. Now we can look at the last part, applying the company logo. First we clone the brush body and bristle surface, and then rotate and move them to arrange the scene. To focus only on the logo application, we temporarily disable the 2 bristle surfaces and the grass modifiers. We also clone the beechwood material and disable the opacity texture maps that we used for the holes. Then we create a new layer for the logo material and put it between the raw beechwood and the protective topcoat layer. We assign the cloned material to the cloned brush body. To apply the logo, we load the logo PNG file into the opacity texture map slot. We set the texture tiling to none, so the logo is not repeated. We invert it and set its channel to 1, just like for the holes before, so the logo is independent of the wood's projector 0. To see and manipulate the logo in the viewport, we change the materials preview. All we have to do now is to change the projector's dimensions to that of the logo and to reorient the projector in the UV mode. We then change the logo material's color to black. We also need to drag the bump map we used for the wood and protective topcoat to the logo material layer, because the printing ink is absorbed by the wood. Now we reactivate the grass modifiers and rotate the cloned brush a bit more so it rests nicely on its bristles at a slight angle. We change the camera back to thin lens so we get a proper photographic depth of field. Do a quick preview of the scene and render. And now it's your turn. Thank you for watching and listening.